Good morning, classmates, as well as Dr. Lieutenant Colonel Christopher Shannon. My name is Torian Davis, and I'm here today to educate you a little more on one of the most prominent intellectuals this world has ever seen up to date, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. The objective of this briefing is for every listener to gain a better understanding and a little more knowledge on who Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois is, as well as show and prove why he is an extraordinary and great leader. Throughout this briefing, you will understand his early life, his childhood, and his upbringing, his behavior and competencies that he utilized, his types of power that he utilized while he was in his leadership position, his successes, his failures, and his accomplishments that truly make W.E.B. Du Bois the extraordinary leader that he so rightfully deserves to be. Without further ado, let's jump into his early life and his upbringing. He was born William Edward Bogart Du Bois, hence the W.E.B. and W.E.B. Du Bois. He was born on February 23rd, 1868 in Barrington, Massachusetts. He was born to his parents, Alfred and Mary Du Bois, and Mary being a part of a prominent family, well, not so much prominent, but a select few whose family was actually bought into freedom. They bought their freedom and they owned land in Massachusetts as well, in Barrington to be exact. Although they had the money to buy the land, they really didn't have much money, so Du Bois relied on donations from his neighbors as well as his church members to attend Fisk University, which is an historically black college in Nashville, Tennessee. And he attended that university from 1885 to 1888. After receiving his bachelor's degree from Fisk, he had the urge and he had the motivation to attend Harvard College. The funny thing about Harvard was at the time they weren't accepting credit from HBCU classes, so his degree was actually null and void. So Du Bois ended up paying his way through 3 years at Harvard with money from summer jobs, inheritance and scholarships, and loans from his friends. And he took that in 1890 to be awarded his second bachelor's degree, which is his first in Harvard's eyes. He graduated cum laude, and his major and his degree program was in history, which so happens to be my major as well, at Troy University. In 1891, Du Bois received a scholarship to attend the sociology graduate school in Harvard, where he earned his degree as well. Let's jump into his behaviors and competencies. His competencies that he showed throughout his leadership, he showed a very high sense of character. More specifically, he displayed high integrity and honesty. Throughout his life, you were able to see that he molded his self and his being from his core values. His core values shown in the political and social equality because he believed they must come first before blacks could hope to have their fair share in the economic pie. He was vocally straught when he attacked Jim Crow laws and practiced inhabited black suffrage. In 1903, he published The Souls of Black Folks, which was a series of essays assailing Washington's strategy of accommodation with the world that we live in and the world that he lived in at that time period. Secondly, when it comes to his behavior and competencies, he had a very high sense of interpersonal skills. He was able to communicate powerfully and prolifically, and he was able to help people understand how their work contributes to a broader business objective. What I mean by that is throughout his time and his tenure, he became the editor of the organization's periodical called The Crisis. The Crisis was basically a periodical that he performed, and he was the editor for 20 years. The Crisis contained expected political essays, but also they contained poems and stories glorifying African American culture and accomplishments. Later, Du Bois was invited to attend an organizational meeting for the United Nations in 1946 because he was able to convey his message so clearly that most people were able to understand, if not all people were able to understand, and they wanted to hear more about him and his educated mindset in the United Nations. As far as his successes, one success that stands out the most to me was his formation of what is called the Talented 10. In The Talented Tenth, he believed that 10% of the African American population should strive to become the black elite. And once they strive to become the black through college courses, through PhD courses, they accommodated to the white Americans at the time to build bridges. Some would say, that connected the two races together so that we can come up with accommodations for both of us, that we both become happy, white and black. But most importantly, it demonstrates just how practical knowledge instruction is critical to creating a better society. If people do not have the capability to understand their place within the world and only receive instruction in the so-called skills that they gain, which was basically Booker T. Washington's outtake on it. He was more for the industrial change, and W.E.B. Du Bois was more of academia. The lives of citizens of the world do not and will not hold the same value. Just because someone can work with other people, they can build with other people, that doesn't mean that they'll be able to have the same conversation level, and it doesn't mean that we will hold the same value because we're less educated than our counterparts. As far as his failures, I personally couldn't find, and he doesn't really have many failures to his life. The only thing that I can consider a failure would actually be quite funny. The Talented Tenth, even though it was a success, and it was a success at the time, after his death, people kind of lost a sense of what the Talented Tenth stood for. We got the fact that we should go and get more educated so that we can survive in this world, because education is the key to surviving in this world. But we lost the idea of coming back to our community and helping others gain that same education and that same knowledge that you have, to build bridges not only with our counterparts, not only with our people of different color, but from our own races as well. Building counterparts, building bridges more so, that connected them to us, which connects us to them. As far as his accomplishments, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stated that history cannot ignore W.E.B. Du Bois's contributions because history has to reflect truth, and Dr. Du Bois was a tireless and a timeless explorer and a gifted discoverer of social truth. His singular greatest position lays in the quest for truth about his own people. There were very few scholars at the time who concerned themselves with the honest study of the black man, and he sought to fill this immense void. The degree to which he succeeded disclosed the great dimensions of a man, and not just a man, an African American man. In his lifetime, W.E.B. Du Bois accomplished much in putting his intellectual gifts to work. In 1897, he directed the Atlanta Conference, which convened annually to generate a concise scientific research on living conditions of African Americans. Not only did he do that, he was a legitimate founder of the NAACP. He was actually a co-founding member, and some of his greatest accomplishments laid in that organization. And in 1920, he actually got awarded the Spring Arm Medal, which is one of the highest medals that you can get in the NAACP. He was awarded the International Lenin Peace Prize by the USSR in 1959. And the site in which he grew up, which was in Barrington, Massachusetts, it was designed as a National Historic Landmark in 1976. And in 2005, actually, Du Bois was honored with a medallion in the Extra Mile, which is Washington, D.C.'s memorial to import and implement more of the American volunteers who sought to change the world. He clashed on occasions with other black leaders over appropriate strategies for the black advancement, and notably he clashed with Booker T. Washington, whose strategy of accommodation and emphasis on industrial education for blacks he rejected. Like I said earlier, he believed that we should educate ourselves more, that we're on the same level, versus gaining an industrial understanding of how to survive in this world and just remain. and just exist into our own culture. He also didn't agree with Marcus Garvey. For lack of better words, he just thought Marcus Garvey had the wrong idea. And although they shared ideas of the same thing, like Pan-Africanism and the liberation of Africa, he just thought Marcus Garvey was on the wrong path. His role as a pioneering Pan-Africanist was memorialized by the few who understood his genius and neglected by many who were afraid that his understanding and his ideas would unite the oppressed throughout the world into revolution. And one point that I meant to touch on earlier was the types of power that he used. The types of power that he was most proficient at was the expert type. And the expert type is defined as it comes from one's own experiences, skills, and knowledge. And as we gain experience in particular areas and become thought leaders in our areas, we begin to gather expert power that can be utilized to get others to help us meet our goals. The reason he was considered an expert power is because he preached education to the African American society, and he was an educated African American. He was actually the first African American to graduate from Harvard with a PhD. And the last power that he used was the legitimate power, and it comes from having a position of power in an organization, such as being a key member of an organization team and even a boss. He was a very key member. He was one of the first key members in the NAACP. Like I stated, he helped co-found the organization as a whole, and he used that power to spread his message even more and spread his message across the country with not only blacks but people of all races. This concludes my briefing.